Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Ron Plain analyzes record-heavy slaughter weights in the hog industry. Greg Ibach looks at Nebraska's Census of Agriculture numbers. Jim Specht describes how early planting can help manage soybean water stress. Tina Barrett discusses why 2013 was less profitable than 2012 for her group of producers. And Stephen Wigullo updates us on winter wheat diseases in Nebraska. University of Missouri Extension economist Ron Plain is our marketing analyst this week. About 3/5 of the country's states have recorded a positive test for the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus since April 2013. But the latest number of new cases in the U.S. was the lowest since January. When Ron joined us Thursday morning, we started by asking for his latest thoughts on the PED virus.
It's behaving so far pretty much as you'd expect. It's a virus. It's much more of a problem during the winter months. It looks like the number of new cases is declining as the weather's warmed up. We expect it to stay fairly low this summer.
What about slaughter weights? I was reading a Reuters article which you were quoted in, and one of the analysts from Chicago was talking about how big these pigs are, and he said they're elephants. What's behind that?
Well, what's behind that is lower corn costs, record high hog prices, and not that many hogs out there. It frees up space in the barns, and so we can keep them around longer. But yes, in March and April we had 6 consecutive weeks with record weights. Prior to last November, we'd never been above 280 pounds. Since November, we've never been below 280 pounds for live weights in Iowa and Minnesota.
One of the issues you brought up in that same article was the problem that processors might have because they're not necessarily equipped to handle pigs that big. Can you, pun intended, expand on that a little bit?
Well, yes. The reality is that the settings of the equipment in slaughter plants are designed for hogs within a certain weight range. And for a lot of plants, they're having to discount some of the heavier hogs because it just doesn't fit the size of the equipment, and it gives extra handling costs to process hogs.
What are we seeing for slaughter numbers, and what could we see once PED maybe impacts that towards summer?
Well, year to date, we're down 4.2% in the number of hogs that we've slaughtered compared to a year ago, and that should probably drop even more this summer. PED, we think, was the worst during the winter. That should impact summer hog slaughter, so we could see the next several weeks slaughter down 5, 6, 7%.
Cash hog prices have slipped a bit. What's the reasoning behind it?
Well, extra weights, I think, a big part of it. Like I said, we're down 4.2% in hog slaughter, but only down 1.2% in pork production. Average hog slaughter thus far this year has been 3% heavier than a year ago, so we're making up for some of that shortage in hogs by feeding them bigger.
Where's the current break even for the producer?
On a live weight basis, somewhere around 56 cents a pound. On a carcass weight, 75 cents a pound, which is both well below the market price right now.
Pork import and export numbers came out from the first quarter. What did the data show?
Well, better than we'd expected. Pork exports up 10% during the first quarter of this year. And given record high hog prices, that's a pretty good performance. China and Mexico were the two big drivers of exports. On the import side, we was up a slim 2% compared to a year ago.
Ron, I'll ask you a two-part question. First, how expensive is pork in the grocery store? And second, are consumers willing to buy it at that price?
Very good questions. We're at record levels for pork in grocery stores. We set the new all-time record in the March data. We don't have the April data out yet, but it's probably going to be a new record. Seasonally, you can expect meat prices for pork to continue to rise till probably August. So bargain's going to be a bit tough to find, I'm afraid.
The May crop report wasn't released in time for our weekly broadcast, but we'll look at the latest USDA estimates next week with Roy Smith. The USDA has released detailed information from its 2012 Census of Agriculture. The county-specific data includes numbers on crop and livestock production, as well as demographics of farm operators. Cherry County and north central Nebraska was tallied the top beef cow county in the nation, with a 2012 inventory of more than 135,000 head. Nebraska also placed two other counties in that category's top 5, with Holt landing 3rd and Custer 4th. The biggest soybean producer in Nebraska was Antelope County, while York County grew the most corn. As a state, Nebraska recorded the 4th highest value of agriculture sales, while placing outside the top 15 for number of farms. However, with 49,969 operations, Nebraska actually bucked the national trend and grew its farm numbers from the 2007 census. In fact, it was the highest number since the 1997 census. Nebraska Department of Ag Director Greg Ibach joined us this week to talk about the state's stats and how Nebraska has managed to increase its farm operations.
Well, I think that the upturn in the farm economy definitely played the major role there. You know, we have gone through periods of time where people sent their kids to college and said, don't come back to the farm. We can't make any money, and that's not necessarily true now. People are sending their kids to college and saying, come back home, we need you to be part of the operation.
Showing the value of what Nebraska has now. The market value of its land and buildings on the farm tripled in the last 10 years. Is that worrisome at all, or do you feel like farmers are leveraged appropriately?
Well, I think that also is an outcome of the return of profitability to agriculture. Farmers usually invest their profits back into their operations in land and machinery, and so that's exactly what they've done. And I think that, you know, it's a good sign for Nebraska agriculture. I think that we're different than the last time we maybe had the real estate bubble in the 70s, where a lot of that was done on debt leverage. And we aren't, it's not the same. Now, bankers tell me that more of it is cash up front, and the debt to equity ratios within those operations is appropriate to be able to withstand some adversity and maybe a downtrend.
The top beef county across all the U.S. was located in Cherry County, Nebraska, just over 135,000 head in the latest census. And 2 of the other top 5 were also in Nebraska. Is that a source of pride for the state?
Well, 3 of the top 5, of course, it's a source of pride. We've always considered ourselves to be the beef state, and so we're just kind of underscoring that that claim right now. And you know, we moved over Texas earlier this year in cattle on feed, so this month we happen to be tied with them, but in general we've been ahead of them all year this year in cattle on feed. So a lot of positives in our beef industry. We still, you know, our pork and dairy and poultry industry still has some strength in it that we maybe appreciate at times and don't talk about as much. But we definitely have room in those categories as well to concentrate on some expansion and look for opportunities there. And I think that's part of how we get to bringing younger people back to the farm. And you'll notice in those numbers, our under 35 farmers increased in number, which went against a national trend as well. And so there's reason to be optimistic there in Nebraska as well.
Do you think Nebraska continues to grow in really all of these areas by the time we see that next ag census 5 years from 2012, which would be 2017?
Well, I think it's incumbent on all of us to work hard in state government, in economic development, even at the local levels, to look for those opportunities to keep pushing agriculture. And I think that we're going to continue to see that. I think we have programs in place to help transition our older farmers that are looking to retire and bring in young and beginning farmers to replace them. And so I'm very optimistic for agriculture in Nebraska.
You can find specific data from the 2012 Census of Agriculture online at agcensus.usda.gov. As of the latest state crop reports, Nebraska and Louisiana are the only two states to meet or exceed their 5-year averages for soybean planting progress. Nebraska had put 11% of its soybeans in the ground as of Sunday, matching the state's average from 2009 to 2013. We've already talked about the benefits of early soybean planting from yield and climatological standpoints. This week, we'll look at how early soybean planting can help manage water stress. With funding from the United Soybean Board, UNL professor of agronomy and horticulture Jim Specht is conducting research on this topic. Jim says there are 3 ways to manage soybean water stress. The first is with irrigation, which isn't available to all producers. The second is by using a no-till system. The third is by getting your soybeans in the ground as early as possible.
Well, planting date is important because you want to get canopy closure in your soybean field before the temperatures get too hot and you evaporate more water from the soil. So when you close the canopy, most of the water that's escaping from that canopy is going from the leaf stomates, which we want, not from the soil evaporation.
Right, tell me more about that. Rather than having it evaporate from the soil, you want it through the plant.
Yeah, agronomists and climatologists call that water loss from the field ET, which stands for evapotranspiration. And what you want is more transpiration and less evaporation. Evaporation is soil basically evaporating as vapor from the soil, and transpiration is when you have the stomates open and they're doing photosynthesis. You don't mind that. In fact, you want it because you want the stomates open.
So you want it to happen by July 4th, ideally, right?
Yeah. We have the saying in soybeans I've used for a long time, I want to see your soybean field green to the eye by the 4th of July. I don't want to see any soil through that canopy.
Yeah. You want it to close up by then. What happens if it doesn't? What have you noticed in yield?
Well, the sooner you get it closure after you plant, the better off you are, because when we measured planting date effects, you lose about 1/4 to 5/8 of a bushel per acre per day after May 1, and the former's for a bad year like 2003, and others for a good year that you might have that you can take advantage of by getting canopy closure sooner.
We're talking a lot about transpiration and evaporation. How much can an acre of soybeans use?
That's a good question. Most people don't recognize how much water a crop uses. We figure that it takes about 20 acre inches. An acre inch is an inch of water, an acre deep. And that's 20 acre inches is about 27,154 times 20. That's about 500,000 gallons of water per acre that a soybean crop will use to get 75 to 80 bushel yields. That's more than a small town water tower holds. They only hold about 300,000. So your small town water tower, you'd only be able to feed an acre of soybeans for just 3/5 of the water it's going to use for that season.
Now, do you think most farmers are realizing the need for that much water, or?
Well, I think most people, urban folk in particular, underestimate that, because around the 4th of July, for example, each plant out there on a regular day will be drinking a cup of water and using it for transpiration. And if you summed it all up, it's about like 70 cups of water. So you need to put a 5-gallon bucket out there next to every plant to solve its problem. Now, some of that water is stored in the soil already and use that. But think of an urban person at a house, if they had to water 120,000 plants in their house, they'd be doing it all day long.
Now, you've noticed that farmers across the state have begun planting soybeans sooner than in the past.
Yes, our Nebraska producers are very smart. They've been doing it since 1980, advancing the soybean date in towards earlier May and late April plantings by a half a day per year. And that's about 15 days total over the last 30 years. And if you apply that to our 1/4 bushel an acre or 5/8 of a bushel per acre per day, you're getting a good some increase in yield. So actually, we're doing it better than every other state except maybe, well, even Iowa, we got them beat now.
Our previous interviews on early soybean planting with Roger Elmore and Tapan Patek can be found on the Market Journal mobile app or through the previous programs tab on the Market Journal website. In May's Nebraska Farmer, what does California have that Nebraska wants? Dairy operations. In this month's issue, you can read about the I-29 corridor states, including Nebraska, and their efforts to lure California dairymen to the middle of the country. The Midwestern states are rich in water and feed and have egg-friendly environments. The article says that's opposite of California, where water restrictions and other regulations are pushing ag operations out of the state. You can read more about this effort in the May Nebraska Farmer. Tina Barrett is the executive director of Nebraska Farm Business, Inc. She works with a group of producers across Nebraska on business planning, financial analysis, and tax preparation. Tina's review of 2013 returns for her farmers and ranchers is complete, and when she joined us earlier this week, she said that group saw a noticeable drop in net farm income from 2012.
We saw a drop of about 55% from 2012, which is a very significant drop from where we have been.
What do you think is behind that?
Well, I think the biggest contributing factor is the price of corn. We're looking at things on an accrual basis, so we're looking at what was really earned in that year. So this is the first year we saw a crop year with those lower prices.
How did the volatility play in the grain markets for both livestock and crop farmers?
We didn't see a ton of movement in the market for that 2013 crop, that new crop last year. And so, there was some difference there, but for the most part, there wasn't a whole lot of marketing opportunities, which was good for the livestock guys and not so great for the crop guys.
Now, what are your expectations for 2014 based off of what it's looking like it will cost to produce both corn and soybeans?
Well, we saw total cost per acre going up for both corn and soybeans last year. Corn went from $730 an acre in 12 to $795. Soybeans also increased. I don't see that stopping. The only two categories that didn't increase for irrigated corn was irrigation repairs and irrigation expense, which coming from 2012 in a drought, those would be two to expect, but every cost increased. The biggest increase was cash rent. I didn't see that changing or haven't heard significant changes for 14. So I don't expect costs to be much lower in 14. So it really depends on where income lies. If we end up with a drought and good prices, we might end up with a good year, especially for those irrigated guys. We end up with a lot of production and low prices. It might be similar to 13.
Where's cost of living at right now?
Cost of living, it didn't go up, but it didn't go down either. So we're sitting just under $100,000 on what the average farm is taking out for living expenses, but taxes did go up from about $40,000 on average to $52,000 on average. So total costs that the non-farm is taking out increased dramatically again. And so when we're talking about $152,000 or so for taxes and family living and making about $174,000, that margin's gotten very tight.
How did the load of debt change from the producers you're working with?
We also saw the debt load increase. We're just sitting under $1 million for average debt now. And I think that's something to be concerned about, especially for those producers who are carrying a higher debt, because that's average. So there's some that are carrying significantly more and some that are carrying considerably debt less. So for those who have financed a lot of purchases the last few years, especially for tax purposes, or are pushing a lot of debt forward to control the taxable income, I think it's something to watch. As net income comes down, we've still got those payments for the next 5 to 7 years to make, and we want to make sure that those are feasible.
What about the debt to asset ratio?
Debt to assets creeping up slowly again. It's at 26%, which isn't bad, but it is creeping up.
One of the things you're working on now at Nebraska Farm Business is working with younger farmers to get them in the habit of record keeping for any producer out there. What are some things that would be good for them to do right away?
Yeah, well, our analysis program is a great thing for any farmer, but sometimes, it takes some habits to develop. And so we would like to get those developed while they're still small enough and eager to try and get things started on the right path. So that's a great path. But, things we're looking at are keeping track of your inventories and doing balance sheets in the first of the year, keeping track of bushels as they're going through, as they're selling things. Keeping some of your input costs split between your enterprises so that we can monitor those closer. So it's a little easier to do when you have a smaller operation and get in the habit of doing those things.
The 2013 annual report can be purchased through the Nebraska Farm Business, Inc. website at nfbi.net. Almost half of the winter wheat in Kansas, the country's leading winter wheat producer, is rated as poor or very poor. And nearly 3/4 of the crop in Oklahoma, normally the nation's second or third biggest producer, is rated in those worst two categories. Compared to the national average, Nebraska's winter wheat crop is on the better half of the curve. The top 18 winter wheat growing states feature a crop rated 31% good or excellent. Nebraska's, on the other hand, is 15 points better in those two categories. On a windy Tuesday morning, we talked with UNL Extension plant pathologist Stephen Wagulo to get an update on the condition and potential disease issues in Nebraska's winter wheat.
Well, in south central and southeast Nebraska, winter wheat it's rated average to good. So we had a good amount of moisture last week, and that has really helped the wheat. Right now it's mostly at the jointing stage of growth.
Are you seeing many disease problems popping up?
Not yet. It has been dry, and so far we are not seeing any high risk of diseases. For those fields that in which wheat was drilled into wheat stubble, growers should be on the lookout for development of residue-borne diseases such as tan spot and septoria. But other than that, we haven't seen any levels of disease to worry about at this point in time.
A refresher on what they should look for specifically with those two things?
Yes, if you have planted wheat into wheat stubble, then the risk of tan spot, which is a foliar leaf spot, is high, especially if we get moisture. And so you look on the foliage and you look for leaf spots. They will be brown and surrounded with a yellow halo. And when you see those, you need to be on the lookout. And if we have moisture, the risk for development is high, and you have to be prepared to take a precautionary measure. We usually recommend applying a fungicide to protect the flag leaf. And the way the weather is right now, it's quite dry, so we don't expect these diseases to really take off like they do during wet seasons.
Is there a strong presence of rust to the south in bigger growing wheat states?
No, we have had reports of rust in Texas and Louisiana, but as of last week, we did not have any rust in Oklahoma or Kansas. The amount of spores that usually blows up, stripe rust and leaf rust, this year has just been very low, even in the southern states, and we don't expect severe levels of rust to develop in our part of the country. However, if there is moisture, we need only a few spores for rust to take off. And so, again, growers should be out scouting and listening out for reports of rust development in the southern states. But so far, the risk of rust seems to be very low this year.
You can find more information on this topic online at cropwatch.unl.edu/plant-disease/wheat. The site includes detailed information on identification and management of 9 Nebraska wheat diseases. And now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we again for the weekly forecast. Of course, we had a storm system move across the state during the midweek period that brought some very welcome moisture to the Panhandle and portions of the western Sandhills. We did see totals anywhere from 3/4 of an inch up to 1.5 inches with the system, and then we also see some accumulating snowfall across the northern Panhandle, particularly as we got into late Wednesday evening into the Thursday time period. In the southwestern corner of the state, we did see some moderate totals, probably in the 1/4 to 1/2 inch was very common, but we had dry slotted in most of south central Nebraska, and we had some isolated pockets of storms in eastern Nebraska. So overall, the best precipitation was in the western part of the state, a lot less in the eastern part of the state and in south central part of the state. And now we have another system that is going to be moving through the region as we go through this weekend that has the potential to bring more significant moisture to the western part of the state, and a little bit uncertainty in course in the eastern part of the state in regards to total precipitation. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we can expect as we go through this period. And here is the upper air pattern for today. We have a trough digging in the western United States. In advance of it, we should see southwest to southerly flow. That will give us some fairly nice temperatures across the southeast part of the state. As we get up in the northwest, we're going to be dealing with a little bit more cloud cover. We may see an isolated thunderstorm start to break out toward the late afternoon hours and the overnight hours across northeast Nebraska, but a much better chance for precipitation occurs as we get into Sunday. As the system starts to exit out of the southern plains, it will bring up moisture up into eastern and western Nebraska, and that will set the stage for the possibility of thunderstorm activity. In fact, looking at the potential for heavy precipitation in the Laramie River Basin, which may portend to some isolated flooding problems with thunderstorm activity, and possibility as the system slows down, particularly as we get into Monday, that we could see some fairly extensive precipitation across eastern Nebraska. So by Monday, you can see the storm start to make its way to our east. We start to see the cold air on the backside of it, so much cooler temperatures are in the forecast as we go into a good portion of next week, and the precipitation should come to an end as we get through the afternoon hours of Monday. Now as we get to Tuesday, the system passes to the east of us and we're under northwest flow, so probably our coolest temperatures of the week, with the possibility that we could see some scattered frost across the northern 1/3 of the state. As we go into Wednesday, we start to see the ridge starting to build back in, and warm air builds into the western part of the state. It'll be a slow drag in the eastern part of the state. We'll probably lift about 5 to 10 degrees, but we'll still be remaining below normal in terms of temperatures. And by the time we get to Thursday, we see that low tries to broaden out and bring a piece of energy into the eastern part of the state that might touch off an isolated thunderstorm, particularly in the northeastern part of the state. And on Friday, we see that trough starts to move to our east, and the ridge regains its strength as it builds northwestward. So any systems that come down the pipe are going to be coming in a northwest flow. So we look at the temperature forecast. We'll see the warm temperatures this weekend across the southeast with scattered thunderstorm activity. We'll have a clearing pattern during the middle of the week, and then we will see a warm up toward the end of the week with a chance of isolated thunderstorm activity. Temperature forecast from next Thursday to the following Tuesday looks for below normal temperatures in terms of precipitation. A drier trend indicated by CPC, but I think that this is really being overdone.
Thanks, Al. Today's interview is discussing hog markets, the 2012 Census of Agriculture, soybean water management, farm income levels, and wheat disease issues can be found on our website at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also find recent content on the Market Journal mobile app, available for smartphones and tablet devices. Next week, Roy Smith will join us to analyze grain markets, and Terry Haney will discuss the Nebraska LEAD program. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.